In example 3, we are tossing 3 different coins, and they specifically want us to consider what is the probability that we can flip these 3 coins and get 3 tails. Now, in the book above this example, you'll see the definition of a compound event. Compound, just like with a compound sentence, you have 2 sentences that you have put together to make 1 sentence. With a compound event, we have 2 or more simple events that have been put together. So a simple event would just be flipping the quarter, or flipping the dime, or flipping the nickel. However, with this compound event, we're flipping all 3 coins. So go ahead and set up your example this way with quarter, dime, and nickel. And then we're going to consider the case where if we flip the quarter, we can have heads or tails. And I think we all know that from experience. So let's start with the scenario where we flip heads first. If we flip heads on the quarter, what are the 2 possibilities we could have on the dime? Well, hopefully you know that would be heads or tails. Now, if we flip heads on the quarter and heads on the dime, what are the 2 possibilities we could have for the nickel? Well, again, we could have heads or tails. However, we could have heads for the quarter, tails for the dime, and then we could have heads or tails for the nickel. So again, you can see this branching out in our tree diagram. Now, we can also consider the case where when we flip the quarter, we actually get tails to start with. So we can have tails for the quarter, and then for the dime, we can have heads or tails. And if we flip tails on the quarter, heads on the dime, we could have heads or tails here for the nickel. Or if we do tails for the quarter, tails for the dime, we could have heads or tails for the nickel. So when we step back, you can see the entire tree diagram. Now remember, we're considering the possibility of having 3 tails, or tails, tails, tails. Let's go ahead and write our sample space down here. So if we start here, heads, 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 that would be this one. That's the outcome. We could have heads, heads, tails. And notice how I'm writing those very close together because there's going to be a lot here. We could have heads, tails, heads. Or we could have heads, tails, tails. So right there you can see we already have 4 outcomes. Over here we have tails, heads, heads. We have tails, heads, tails. Tails, tails, heads. And then lastly, the one we actually want, which is tails, tails, tails. So that's the one we're being asked about. What's the probability of getting that? Well, how many times do you see tails, tails, tails along the bottom? I only see it once, so that's 1 time out of how many total outcomes do you see in the sample space? There's 8. So we can say there's a 1 out of 8 chance, which is 12.5%. So we have a 12.5% chance, or about a 13% chance of getting 3 tails in a row. So it's not very likely, but it certainly is possible.